Good afternoon, Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Hirono, and members of the subcommittee. Can you hear me well enough?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate you for inviting me to testify today. I was also a former staffer for Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. I am Nikenge Harmon Johnson, an Oregonian, an American, and a lawyer. My mother, father, and their parents were born in this country, as were my great-grandparents and going back generations. My family were kidnapped Africans, then enslaved people forced to work for no compensation. Later, my family members were steelworkers, post office letter carriers, law enforcement officers, military veterans, homemakers, and artists. Regardless of our economic or social status, we all share something in common beyond our family ties. None of us has yet to enjoy the full rights due to American citizens under the United States Constitution. In our fight for civil rights, we've alternatingly been ignored and targeted by local and federal agencies. So this is nothing new. Nevertheless, we persevered in spite of it all because we are indeed Americans. Now we take to the streets to declare that our lives matter. And we've been met by dangerous federal forces sent from Washington, D.C. to silence the movement for Black lives. It is difficult to see this government respond so inappropriately with such violent and expensive force at a time when those resources should be spent to build justice in our community and staunch the deadly, growing COVID-19 pandemic. In recent years in Portland, month after month, white supremacists marched in our city. They even bust in thugs and would-be Nazis to harass Portlanders. Some were promoted by one of today's witnesses for the majority. Black and brown Oregonians shared tips, and we warned one another to avoid downtown because those ridiculous but demonstrably deadly white supremacists were at it again in our community. In spite of Portland's disgust, our local police actually assisted them, even though at times they were armed with guns and weapons as they rallied near the federal building in downtown Portland. Local police regularly chatted with them via text message. So is it any surprise, senators, that the same police would declare Black protesters and their supporters as rioters? They are not on the side of Black Portlanders, and they do not stand for the justice that we seek. Also note, federal officials did not lift a finger to deter or quiet earlier white supremacist crowds. Federal officials, other than Oregon's own congressional delegation, did not state concern about dangerous men rallying near the federal building that we've heard so much about today. Even after one of those white supremacists attacked a Black woman and 2 Black girls and murdered 2 white men and attempted to murder a third who stopped him from harming those girls. I do not recall this body holding hearings to listen to the hurt and harm that those regressives caused. But here we are today. What's different? Now the federal government is involved because the current administration has taken a side, the side of the status quo and continued disenfranchisement of African Americans. Contrast those events with the past 2 months in Portland. Following the police murdering George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Kendra James, and Jason Washington, people in my community dared to stand up for Black lives. We gathered together to insist that the time is now for America to be as good as its promise to us all. That Black Lives Matter must be a bold and unexpected statement for some officials in the Beltway. Either that, or they enjoy the opportunity to create political theater for its own purpose. That is why they sent who we now know are federal police to Oregon. So after weeks of demonstrations that had nothing to do with the federal building or the federal government really, but were focused on local issues in our community, the feds inserted themselves. Supporters of the movement for Black lives were met with batons, burning hot munitions, hard rubber bullets, and chemical gases that federal employees fired into the nightly crowds, as you've heard from other speakers. Worse, however, federal officials who took oath to defend this country, its citizens, and the Constitution demonstrated to Oregon and to the world that when there's a political or social movement they do not approve, some politicians may deploy Border Patrol and other feds to shut it down. It is fascist behavior, the likes of which this country has fought against in foreign wars. I'm an anti-racist, and I'm an anti-fascist. All Americans should be. Fortunately, those misguided federal officials and their police also showed us something else. When confronted by organized, resolute protesters who greeted their violence with bubbles, slideshows, barbecue cookouts, and unity, the federal forces floundered. Federal police went too far for days, perhaps thinking that they could drive the people of Oregon back into our homes out of fear. Instead, the opposite occurred. Thousands more Oregonians gathered in Portland to speak, to demand, to holler, and to sing that Black lives matter. Do you know about Portlander Mac, a local organizer? He was using his mobile phone when suddenly he was hit in the forehead with a paint projectile and concussed. Mac was standing 50 yards away from the federal building when he was shot. Fortunately, he was wearing a bicycle helmet. I'll briefly tell you about Kristen before I close. She was shot by federal police. She said she heard a boom and then felt the munition smash into her forehead. Kristen stated, "I was inspired to use not only my voice, but also my body to defend the First Amendment, right to protest and send a clear message that Black lives are worth fighting for." She said that when she was hit, no announcement whatsoever came from the feds. They were completely silent as far as she could tell. It is time for all of us to get into good trouble, necessary trouble. The Honorable John Lewis called upon us to do so, and I am answering the call, as are many thousands of Oregonians and people across this country. Until justice claims its victory and our nation's Constitution is made real to all of us in this country, I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you.